It is a beautiful day to be alive, and I'm so glad we have this time together. I'm Sana Laybourne, she, her. I am a professor, scholar, connector, and avid reader. I've always loved learning about what's happening in our social world and sharing that knowledge, especially over a good cup of coffee. And so here we are. Each week on Let's Grab Coffee, I catch up with experts from around the world who are investigating our most pressing social issues and common curiosities. Over the next hour, you'll learn about their inspirations, motivations, and of course, what they know about the world around us. So go ahead and grab that cup of coffee and get ready for an insightful and engaging conversation. Around the world, coffee is part of countless cultures' daily routine. Perhaps your day starts with brewing a cup at home or grabbing your daily fix on the way to work. In fact, coffee is a global industry worth $495 billion per year. Yes, you heard that right, billion with a B. But less than 1% of this revenue returns to people of African descent, who are the originators of coffee, or even to African countries where the majority of our coffee is imported from, highlighting the ongoing inequities in the coffee trade. One local Memphis company is on a mission to change how we understand coffee's Black history and its Black future. Cxffeeblack and its anti gentrification coffee club is a globally recognized coffee company. In addition to creating an entirely all Black coffee supply chain from Ethiopia to Memphis, the first of its kind, Cxffeeblack also hosts the Barista Exchange Program, which took four Black American baristas from the U.S. to Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Kenya, and which will bring African baristas to Memphis in a cultural and coffee educational exchange. Most recently, they were awarded the Global Notable Roaster of the Year by Sprudge Media Network, which is a renowned international authority on coffee and its culture. Today, it is my distinct honor to be joined by Renata Henderson for some coffee talk. Renata is the co founder, alongside her husband, Bartholomew Jones, of Cxffeeblack. Renata is the roaster for Cxffeeblack, the first Black female roaster in Memphis, and she continues the tradition of Black women roasters in Ethiopia, where coffee originates. Additionally, Renata is an artist. She designs the lettering for Cxffeeblack's coffee packaging and many of its merchandise designs. She is the director behind some of the Cxffeeblack music videos, and she is a singer and songwriter. Renata, I am so glad that you are here and we have this opportunity to chat. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like that's the show. I think you just did the whole show just now
Oh, that's it. All
in your
right, y'all.
intro.
No, we have so much more to talk about. But first, I have to ask because I see that you are drinking something. Is it coffee? Is it
Yes,
something
of
else?
course. It's coffee. It's coffee, of course. So I'm drinking it out of our Barista Exchange mug. And this is a sponsorship of ours with Mir, and they're great, sustainable. We just love them. So it keeps the coffee just how I want it during this interview. But I'm drinking an anaerobic Burundi that we just got in yesterday. And I fired it up this morning and now I'm trying it. We're just dialing in some of the notes, profiling it. So it's really good. It's very citrusy, a little bit, I would say even fresca notes. So I'm excited for whenever when we get to the point to release it. We've had a Burundi before, but this is a new process. So we're excited about that.
Oh, okay. You had a lot of coffee words just in that description. So, let's break some of these words
Yeah,
down for our listeners. All right, because I
definitely.
heard anaerobic, I heard,
Uh,
processing, I heard Burundi, I heard dialing in, profiling. All right, let's first
mhm.
start with the coffee fruit itself because you said this is a Burundi. So can you
Yes.
tell us, what we're referring to there, and then we'll get into some of the other parts of your
For
description.
sure. So definitely, Burundi is the origin from which we imported the coffee. And so Burundi is East Africa. It's at the border of Rwanda. Similar makeup as far as land, which impacts elevation, which impacts the growing of coffee, which is a fruit. Coffee is the seed of a fruit. So when we're thinking about elevation, you're thinking about hills, you're thinking about mountains, whole communities that harvest around this one fruit that grows in higher elevation, and there are some lower elevation as well. So Burundi is where it's from. Anaerobic is one of the experimental processes that is done in the coffee world. So when I say process, it is what they do on what they call a washing station. It's what they do there in the farm to get the seed out of the fruit, basically. So when we're talking about a processed coffee, if it's a natural process, if it's a wash process, if it's anaerobic or yeast, these are just ways that they actually get the seed out of the fruit, and the things that they do to bring out different flavors or different, which is what, when I say notes, um, the different flavors, perceived flavors, let me say that everybody tastes different, tastes things differently based on their backgrounds, based on, taste buds are different for everybody. So, everybody has different experiences there. So when I'm talking about notes, that's what I mean about notes. What was the other thing? You said I say things and I don't even realize I say them.
Well, I'm all the way keyed in because I'm like, ooh, this new coffee. I can't wait to try it. But you also talked about that you said you were like dialing in and
Okay.
profiling.
Profiling. So, dialing in refers to the brewing methods. So, we want to see how it best tastes as far as the grind size, which is how big or how small you want to grind it. And then water temperature, which is pretty self-explanatory. And that's what it means dialing in. So playing around with basically a recipe. So it's like when you're trying to make something as simple as a brownie or, whatever your recipe may be, you may notice, oh, this is a little bit flat. I need to add more baking powder or whatever. I'm not a baker, so I don't know. But dialing in is basically taking the recipe and figuring out how can it best be consumed, or according to your taste buds too. So, and then when I talk about profiling, profiling is a step back. So profiling is when we get the green coffee. So I told you coffee is processed from a fruit. The seed of the fruit is the actual coffee that we drink. We call it a coffee bean. It's a coffee seed. It's not actually a bean. It's not in a pod. So when we get it in these big sacks that basically look like, the when you do the potato sack rice, it looks just like those bags or potato sack rice. And so they come in those big bags in about 120 pounds. They do it in kgs, but this is America, so I don't know how to translate that to kgs off the top of my head. Um, but it's about 120, 140 pounds of coffee in each of those. And when we get it here, we have to figure out, okay, how can we best develop, which means how can we take this from green to brown, basically? How can we best cook it to bring out the flavors that you're naturally gonna taste from it or supposed to taste from it? And that's based on, again, the elevation, where it was grown, how they processed it, the amount of time that it took to process, just a lot of different things. And so when we get it, we bring it to the roaster. So Sana already kind of gave the background as far as my roasting experience. I'm going on 3 years of roasting this year, which
Ooh.
is wild to me. It feels like just yesterday that we had a big discussion, and I was just like, I really think it makes sense for me to do it, and we were just talking about honoring, and we talk a lot now too about like honoring the root that we come from, and honoring our ancestors, and honoring tradition, because I think that's definitely a lost art in the West. And so we had this big conversation, and that feels like we just had that conversation yesterday, but that was almost 3 years ago. So um so yeah, when I bring it here and I put it into the roasting machine, which Sonic can see, but the listeners can't. But it's basically a big drum that, there's heat that kind of pumps into the bottom of it, and air, and you get to play around with the different variables. I'm a science geek, so some of the variables we have are the heat that is going to actually obviously develop the coffee itself. So take it from green to actual developed coffee. And then you have what's called the air loft, which the air loft pushes through, and that's what's going to help maintain the fruitiness of the beans, of the seed. Look at me saying bean,
Mhm.
of the seed. Because it comes from a fruit. So we definitely want to taste the notes that the coffee cherry has to offer. So the loft is going to do that, and the loft also keeps it suspended so that it doesn't land on that, at the bottom where the heat originates at the bottom. So the air loft pushes that air through. It's going to keep the beans basically, when you have to take something out of the oven and turn it over and then put it back in. It's very similar to that, but it's constantly turning them over with convection, heating it with convection, which is just circulation of heat. And so, yeah, the profile comes in something called first crack, which is when the seed itself gets so hot on the inside. It's similar to popcorn, where the inside gets so hot, it heats up, and then you hear this audible pop. It indicates that the inside of the seed has warmed up to its highest degree of being developed. And some people push past that to something called second crack, which you can definitely do, especially if you like your roast a little bit darker. We do mostly light, some light medium, and we have one dark. But some people go to second crack. But first crack is when the inside of it basically matches the outside of the outside air. And so you're going to get that audible sound. So all that is basically profiling it. So I decide what's the best heat to get this developed best. Do I need to change the heat? Do I turn it up or turn it down at first crack? So there's first crack, but before that, there's something called the Maillard phase, which is when the coffee itself is, so that's the part that you pay the most attention to after it dries, which I feel like I'm going through a whole like roasting tutorial session right now. Is this uh, but yeah, when you put it in, it has to dry because the coffee seeds are dense. They're holding all that water still. And think about the pit of a peach, or any kind of seed that you get to is holding all the moisture from that fruit. So the seed has to dry first, so it dries within the first 5 minutes or so. And then after that is the Maillard phase, which is really one of the most important phases in the whole roasting cycle, to make sure the coffee itself is getting the air it needs, the heat it needs to pull out those fruity or caramelly, whatever it is you want to play around with, chocolatey. So all that to say, um, when I say profiling is a lot of different variables, and it's fun to play around with them. I think I do something called sensory roasting. And so I take in what the seeds are giving. So like if they are turning a yellowish color, and making not yet making the first crack sound, I know, this is probably drying, is not close to first crack. I can play around with the air a little bit to give it some, to give it a little bit of wiggle room. And so I do that with smell, I do that with sight, I do that with sound. And usually there's going to be this popcorn like smell. It's amazing. What I love about it is when roast, it releases all those smells into the neighborhood too. And so I love that, that everybody around is just getting used to the smell of roasted coffee. It's amazing. So anyway, all that, yeah. So that's my very short of it. Of
I
what
love that.
I
I
like.
love I love it so much.
I see you taking
I
notes. So
look, I have a whole page of notes. Um,
do I
coffee
have a new
nerd.
apprentice? You
You
ready to
might.
start next week?
I'm ready. You know I'm ready. Coffee
I
nerd
do.
checking
I do.
in. I love it. And I think one for people who maybe who drink coffee and it's just simply like maybe again, like I said in the intro, like it's just part of your daily routine. You maybe not aren't really thinking a whole lot about it, or maybe you see coffee as like, oh, I need this to, help me have some energy or focus or whatever it is. I think we miss out on how complex coffee is.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's right
Absolutely.
there, literally in our face or in our hands every single day. But even with your description, and again, just a piece of, right, like a mini roasting tutorial, right? And there's so much more involved in it. And I love how, you kept bringing us back and reminding us like, this is a science, but it's also a
Mhm.
science of all of your senses, and it is so many
Mhm.
different variables at play, which reminded me again of Coffee Black, the name, and having that X in Coffee Black where
Yeah.
normally there would be an O. And
There you
again,
go.
thinking about those variables, right?
Yes, yes. Okay, son, you are okay. Can I just say I was bragging on you yesterday and your ambassadorship and how great you are. Some stuff I'm like, oh man, I need to refresh my coffee black knowledge in that area. So you'll just be like, because I know that the X means the variable, which could be independent or dependent. Just thinking about when you guys first started importing the coffee from Addis Export, I'm like, how does she know all of this?
Look, I like to go all in. I'm like to take the deep dive when I get interested in something, I am like super interested. And so it is fun for
No
me.
apologies needed.
Yeah, and you know what? But I
I
think
love it.
that is Coffee Black too at its core because both you and Bart, as you all learn more about coffee and really learning more about its history, it was the opportunity for you two to nerd out on coffee, but also to combine it with something that both of you had already, which was a deep desire to pour back into your community, wherever that community may be, or whatever form that community might take. And so I see that
Absolutely.
as really the foundation of Coffee Black in itself, of like getting really super interested and invested in learning, but also in one another.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's definitely at the heart for both of us. So as believers, and I share with anybody like my heart for coffee and for people is God's heart for people. I'm hoping I can even get even closer to God's heart for people. And so for me, it's a driving factor to be able to be curious and to learn and to educate and to teach. But I think the biggest part of what I just mentioned there is being a constant learner. So like always researching. And I know you definitely relate to that. Like what I know of you is just that you are a learner. Like, and I love that. And that's something that's so inspiring to see. I love to see a person who's a learner and who's willing to listen and not be too, I don't know. I just feel like there's a humility that comes in leading, and there's a humility that comes in connecting that's necessary. And so for us, we hope to build more curious people, and like for people who come into the shop and who are just like our other Basha bestie Adam will come in and say, hey, did you know? And then he'll give us like a coffee, like this random coffee knowledge. And I'm like, this dude actually took time outside of being at the shop, outside of school, because he's a full-time student, to learn and to bring it back. And I think both of us as former teachers too, like that just is our heart of seeing people grasp this knowledge for themselves and go beyond, like go beyond the things that we have to offer. We're not the holders of any knowledge. We're sharing the things we're learning as we're learning it. Okay. So we're not don't come to us to try to find some sage, history that nobody else knows. And we're, the avatar basically. That's not us. Like I wish, I do think I would be a waterbender if that is relevant to this conversation. But but needless to say, there isn't anyone, and I think that's what's important if we're using the analogy of the Africa, there is no one tribe that is the holder of all things. Like I think something that we're learning is like there are people in every space that we're in who have something to contribute and who have this special skill that God has planted in people, honestly, for his glory. And so, like, it's been cool to see that being nurtured and people discovering it for themselves. And so, yeah, I think it just kind of shows in the heart of what we do, and people are able to partake in that heart of what we do. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. As you were talking, it just made me think about, again, planting more seeds, right? Planting
Yeah.
seeds. And even with the example of Adam, one of the Basha besties, and we'll talk about what that refers to in a minute. But
Yeah.
planting the seed, right? So here you have Cxffeeblack, and it's planting a seed for those of us who didn't even know that we were coffee nerds to go out and learn more information, and for Adam to be looking up all this other coffee information and tidbits, and for me to start my pour over journey and making coffee at home. But even I think more than that, the seeds within the community of seeing a coffee club that is very different than maybe what we have come to kind of associate with coffee shops,
Yeah.
but actually a
Mhm.
coffee club, a coffee community, a place where, people can meet or organize or just feel welcomed and have a
Yeah.
conversation, that at another type of coffee shop, it would be almost taboo to talk to somebody sitting next to you. So I think of all the different seeds that you're planting, both for individuals, but also for communities and really reviving community. And I think that is
Yeah.
so important.
Yeah.
Um,
I think to that point, I think we're building what we would want to walk into. I mentioned it in the first documentary of how and I don't know, maybe you as a woman of color have experienced this too, but just like walking into shops and having to basically figure out the rules of engagement and engage based on a standard that I didn't know was already set. And I have to meet this standard versus being able to come in and just order coffee, which is what you think you're walking into. And so I think we're building what we would want. Yesterday, we had a group who came in just out of nowhere. The lady apologized who was leading the group. She was like, I'm so sorry. I would I would have checked with y'all. I have a big group. We can leave if we need to. I was like, ma'am, do you need me to get you some more chairs? I was like, that's not what this is about. She was like, we might get loud. I was like, it's always loud. And I told her, I said, this is for us. And she was like, okay, and they sat down and they stay here for hours. And for us, it's less about, oh man, that means that we're gonna triple our sales goals for the day and blah 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 blah. And while those things could be a part of the ripple, what I was so excited to see was her sitting in a chair, like actually taking that invitation and then giving permission to herself and the people that she was with, like to be, like just be. You don't have to come on some secret rules of engagement that haven't been, you know what I mean? Like, and you know me, I don't believe in it. I would much rather leave somewhere than to be pretentious, in a place that either I'm not welcomed or I have to put on a mask. I just don't do it. I just don't do it. So yeah, we're really building something that we will want to walk into. We want to walk into as a company, as a club, all of it.
I mean, I think again, it's going back to the origins of coffee, of thinking about like, can we have peace with this cup of coffee?
Come on now.
And that
Yeah.
really has stuck with me, even thinking about, again, like, where there's coffee, there's peace, or how you all say it for Coffee Black, like, may your hood lack no coffee nor peace. But again, just
Yeah.
reminding us, and maybe even for some people, teaching us for the first time, what coffee's origins are, what coffee was meant for, again, community versus just a way for us to be more productive, not a tool of capitalism, but rather an offering for community and for peace.
For sure. For we learned a lot this last trip. So Sana described a little bit the Barista Exchange. And so we went to Addis Ababa and Kigali. So Addis is in Ethiopia and Kigali is in Rwanda. And when we were in Addis, it was the first day, Sana. Okay, we haven't really told this story many places, but it was the first day, and we knew we wanted to meet with some community leaders who were from just different spaces regionally in the rural areas. So farmer, all of, those are the people we wanted to meet. And these certain individuals are elected by people in their community, and they are considered respectable leaders and, spiritual leaders. So we wanted to talk to them about coffee. Like, why is coffee a culture in Ethiopia, as opposed to, if I go to Rwanda now, the culture is building, yes, and it is starting to thrive. But how did you guys make it or keep it as it has been for so long? And so we're at this, we went to a hotel called it Ramada. We in America, good old America, call it Ramada. And so we go to Ramada, and so we are on this patio waiting for the leaders to arrive. Down the street, we just see this royal procession. Okay, at least that's how it looks in my eyes. This royal procession of older men coming, just robed and, like, they've got all the sash. They're just looking fly, walking down the street, almost floating, as if they were floating. And so they're coming into Ramada, and they're just like greeting us as they're coming in, and just, doing the whole, the head nod. That's universal. Uh, and so and yeah, so they go in, and then the women come, and the women come in, and I'll tell you a little bit more about each of those shortly. But the women come in and they hug each of us. They're just like, I don't know, it was beautiful. And so we go into this room, and we learn about a 2000 year old, my Memphis coming out, 2000-year-old ceremony called Buna Kala. And so Buna is coffee. So Buna Fnagia Hindabina, which means may your house lack no coffee nor peace. So anytime you hear Buna, that is the Afana Romo translation of coffee, basically. And so Buna Kala, the Kala it translates to sacrifice, basically. So the sacrificing of the coffee. So it's a process that they walk through for multiple things. So they do it for births, they do it for weddings, and they do it for conflict resolution, which the birth and the weddings, of course, that makes sense, is more celebratory. I was super interested in the conflict resolution part of the Buna Kala, because basically the last time we were there, we got to see our host work through some conflict with somebody who he was like, there was some stuff happening over land, and they met over coffee for hours and resolved it. And so coffee, in my mind, I was like, oh wait, so coffee literally is a part of the process. Like, it's not a byproduct. It's not like an afterthought. Like, it's legit part of the process. And learning this time about Bunakala helped me to understand how that conflict resolution has really, how that has, or not even that, how coffee has really become an integral part of that. And so he's telling us the history behind it, and how they have these tales. It's basically like a creation story of its own. Um, oh gosh, I can't remember what they call. I don't remember what they they have a big, it's called Big Black God. And I don't know what the actual name, what they call him. Um, but basically he creates man, very similar to the creation story. He creates man, man sins against him, and the tears that he cries over the man, because in this story he had to kill man because he sinned against God, and he cried over the man were what went into the soil and built coffee trees. Which
Wow.
is so crazy to me. So the tears, so they legit see coffee as grown from the tears of God, a gift from him to us as a way to basically atone for the sins of man. So he is very, like I said, it's similar to the creation story, similar to kind of some of what we believe as far as the incarnation and things like that. But it's crazy because so thinking of it in that context makes it make sense as to why they would use it in conflict resolution. And so, anywho, going forward, I don't want to keep the men and the women that I mentioned a mystery. So the men are called abagadas, and they are considered like the elders of the communities that they're from. They're elected based off of their merit and the things that they've done and how they represent, people and things like that in their community. Abagadas, and then we have women who are called Adasinkes. The Adasinkes are orbiters. I don't know what word I was trying to say.
I was with you though. I was like,
Arbiters.
okay.
Arbiters of justice, not orbiters, arbiters of justice. So they speak up for the voiceless. They are teaching their molding, and there also is a spiritual aspect of them. So what we learned is that the women were more of the spiritual leaders in those communities. So the Abagada actually even followed the Adasinkes in spiritual matters, which I thought was super cool and very empowering. And so we see this and we learn that this was cultivated. There's this story about a farmer who he noticed at a certain part of the day that his goats did they know his goats just started turning up at a certain point of the day, and he was just like, I wonder what's happening with my goats. And so he kind of follows them and he finds the coffee tree. And there are lots of versions to this story, but basically one of the prevailing ones are that he finds the coffee tree, he sees this fruit, and he's just like, this must be what they're eating. So, he tries in different ways, eating, like directly ingesting it, just different putting it in things, whatever. And so as the tale goes, he takes it back to his wife, and his wife and the women in that community take it and they cook it. And they take the seed out and they cook the seed, and they grind it. So old school, mortar and pestle. And then they submerge it in water. And of course, there are other methods they did before this, as the legend goes. But that was the first coffee roasting and brewing in Ethiopia, which is wild to me. So yeah, there's so much history behind it. Fast forward to 1616, stolen by the Dutch over a series of, we got the transatlantic slave trade beginning in 1619. We got bodies moving, we got crops moving. And so since we're moving these crops, we've got to have the people who know how to grow these crops to come with the crops. So they take the crops and they take the people, but what they don't take is the culture, and they don't take the blessing, and they don't take the even the spirituality that's behind it, like the belief system, the dignity and all of that comes with it. They just take the product, which is how it gets to 2000 years later. You're sitting at a coffee shop in anywhere USA, and there's no respect for it. So it's kind of it's definitely an uphill battle to climb to say I want to reclaim the history of coffee. So, I think especially as a Black woman who comes from, my family is, I've discussed it multiple times. My grandfather was in the sanitation strike of 1963 with Dr. King. He was a sanitation worker. He got to march with Dr. King. My family has always, both sides, has always been very big on like sharing our history and the dignity that comes from our people and through our people. So to be told this story about coffee that is, for us, the history that we know now versus the history that we're given about us just being slaves. And don't get me wrong, that's a big traumatizing, unfortunate part of our history. And I'm not brushing over the weight of that. The weight of that is too much for me to talk about right now. And I know that so many people, it's really hard to reconcile the redemptive parts of our history because of that ridiculous blight that was created through greed and just anyway. I'm trying not to get emotional. So to say I want to reclaim a history to me is not, that's not a big feat, because the history I know of my family and myself and my bloodline is not one simply of being a slave, or simply being oppressed. Like, my history and my bloodline is one of justice, like seeking justice and loving mercy, and walking humbly with God. And so for me, it was not, that was nothing to say I want to reclaim it. But I think the harder thing is um, making it the narrative. People who we just get spoon fed, we get spoon fed craziness every day. And so like building a narrative around us and honoring our root, which is kind of where we have landed now. We started off with love Black people like you love Black coffee, and it still rings true. The only way you can honor your root, our root, everybody's root is in Africa. So any listeners who didn't know that, let's put that out there. But honoring our root additionally means let's acknowledge, redeem, and perpetuate the history and cultures that are attached to us, that are beautiful, that are lifting, and for the edification of others, the edification of self. Like, these are things that we want to honor in our lives. And so all of that kind of spearheads into what we do as a company. Is what our campaign is about with the We Funder for our new building, for all of our new projects. Is what our Barista Exchange spearheads to. Is what our internship spearheads to. Is what our first SIP program. So many things that we're doing, and it's all to bring us back to the common idea of honoring our root and what does that mean contextually. And so while we were in Ethiopia this first day, you go through the Bunakala ceremony. It's a couple hours. Actually, it's probably 3 or 4 hours. And they show us the ceremony. I don't have enough time to go through the whole ceremony, but it was beautiful and just traditionally, I don't know, like elegant. And I don't know, it was just, there was so much, I don't know, it felt transcendent in a way too. And so at the end of the ceremony, we get these coffee, they use an actual full cherry and they cook it, they boil it in cow's milk. And the milk is the sweetest milk you're ever going to taste. It's like Captain Crunch milk, but without the refined sugar. And so it's the sweetest milk, no pasteurization. Okay. It's from that cow that's right over there. And then they also use cow's butter, and these are all things that they give as gifts to like the bride or the mom or whoever, whatever the ceremony calls for. So we're eating these cherries after it goes through the whole ceremony, and they say, "Hey, come over here." They're talking to Bart, "Come over here. We have something for you all." And so they just down some, and they crown us, like they robe us as a Bagada and Adasinke.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we weren't expecting that because we had just been named the year before. So there's a big kind of like cultural root a cultural practice around naming and how important it is to name, and even how it's a little bit different. Even like surnames are different than like first names may be your father's surname, um and so, or your father's first name, sorry. um did I say first names? Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So first names of your father are your last name. There we go. But so yeah, there's a big emphasis on naming. And so they name us Adesinke, which is what I am, which those are the women. And so the implications are that they walk around with this thing called a sinke, it's a stick. And they told us a few stories. One of them was like they get this stick passed down from an older woman, their mother usually, and there's like authority in the stick. So like the women use these sticks to basically enforce justice, specifically for other women. And so I thought that was amazing. I was like, oh, that sounds, I already do that.
Right.
But also, but also they told us like this is an aside, but you can take the stick and pass it. If you want to pass it on to a younger lady that you're like training to become an Adesinke whenever she gets married, and she can take this stick, and this was so funny to me. She can take the stick, and if there's a guy she's interested in, she can throw it at his house and just throw it at the house. And if the family, when the family sees this, they have to consider her for marriage, even if she's, and they were like, even if she's like, not, he don't know her, even if she's not attractive to him, like I was like, but I think what was so cool about that was the power in that. There was
Mhm.
like this power in a stick. And culturally, things, it's definitely different for us in America. That's just what it is. There's no shame on either way, no shade. But I just thought there was so many things that just were so interesting. And so yeah, I was named in Adesinke, my husband was named in Abagada, and culturally we had to bring it back to the context of being here and being in Memphis. And we definitely had to immediately, I had to use the stick as soon as we got back, because we were in we were in, I won't say contract, but we were working with an organization that just took some stances politically that we were not aligned with and that we couldn't sign our name on. And it was not even, it was a humanitarian stance. Like it was like a stance that we personally didn't think they had the authority to make in the way that they did. So we say, you know what, we respect the institution of people being able to have their own, their right to speech and to your opinion. This is America. But we cannot partake. And so that for us, I remember having that conversation with my husband of like, how do we contextually, because I immediately we both were like, this feels like we should step into those roles, like what does that mean as an Adesinke and as an Abagada right now? And we said if it means pulling out, like, and this to clarify, this was one of our most lucrative wholesale accounts that we had. And we were building some really good, some upcoming events and some, I don't know, some things that we both thought would be very beneficial and that we both were on the same page about. But, when we came to this spot where we had to just make a decision, it was just like, I think this is kind of what God's calling us to, and we walk in it and walk in obedience. So, um, that's kind of the history behind it. And of course, now it's almost $500 billion industry growing. And so, for us, we want the voices that don't get to speak ever, like, because they're too far up a mountain, and so or they're being muted, literally being muted. So yeah, so that's where I'm very mindful when I'm talking about that because I want to make sure I'm like yeah, honoring that root and honoring the fruit, you know, honoring the root
Mhm.
and the fruit. Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That is exactly what was coming to mind as you were sharing, both just the experience that you all had when you were in Ethiopia, but then also that experience once you came back, thinking about honoring your root. And like, we can't honor what we do not know and what we have not
Oh,
been
no.
brought into, you know?
Oh,
And
no.
so I just see, layers of layers and layers on that, right? So, as you mentioned, like, one part of Coffee Black's kind of mission is like acknowledging the history, which is kind of one layer. And then once we're able to acknowledge, then we can say, okay, how do we actually walk in this knowledge that we know? And you very much had that opportunity to say, like, as an Adesinke, like, I know, like, part of who I am is to be able to see and then see what's happening and then actually say something and do something about it with that discernment. And so I definitely
Absolutely.
see that as who
Come on,
you
discernment.
are.
Come on, discernment.
And even just,
Yeah.
knowing more about your story individually, and then you embark story collectively, I see that rootedness in purpose that has just
Mhm.
permeated throughout kind of Coffee Black, the business, but then also Coffee Black, y'all's union together as
My
well.
boo. My boo.
Right? And so again, just
Yeah,
another
yeah.
another process of like honoring your root, which I think it takes on so many different dimensions, the deeper that you get
Yeah.
into the root, right?
Oh my gosh. So many. Because then you think about root, like Route 66, like honor the root. Okay, that you take. There's so many roots. Like, we just it just normalizing honoring roots, like make it a thing to honor where you come from again.
Yeah, to honor where you come
Yeah.
from, to honor
I don't know
where
where
you
you come from,
are
where you going,
going.
where you going, the roots, the route, the root.
The route and the roots. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. I don't want to leave our listeners hanging because we mentioned the Basha bestie. So I had to bring it back because I don't want to gatekeep the Basha or the Basha bestie
No.
from people. And so I'll just say that
Yeah.
Coffee Black has a variety of different farmers that you all work with very intimately. And so there are always different
Yeah.
types of coffee in the shop. But for me, I will say my Coffee Black moment was having a Basha on pour over. And that was what was my gateway into my own like pour over journey of making coffee at home. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little
Mhm.
bit about Basha and then also Basha Besties.
Basha Bestie. So Basha Bekele is a farmer in Ethiopia. He's not in the Guji zone. I have to double check about which region he's in. But man, that man knows how to cultivate a seed. Okay, like we got to try one of his newer harvests so in November, and it tasted just like a straight. I mean. It tasted like Skittles, Sana. It tasted like Skittles. Okay. I don't know how you made that taste like Skittles. So Sana and Adam both have really unique ways to dial in now that we have, the common wording, to dial in Basha the best way that it is for them. So I've had Basha with Adam. I've had it iced in a lot, like he's made his own like syrups and all that kind of stuff, which is so cool to see him kind of make it his own. So I've had that with I've seen Sana with her pour over situation online, talking about she feel like a boss, feeling like a boss. And so yeah, it's a very what notes do you get from it, Sana, that you love? Like, because I think I get different notes from what you get.
Yes, and I love this because even hearing you earlier in this conversation and the other day as well, talking about the different notes, and I want to get back to that too.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
for me, for Basha, it tastes chocolatey to me,
Okay.
chocolatey, and maybe even I say warm, but I think maybe like chocolate, toffee, and then I
Ooh,
will say sturdy is what I get from it. And sturdy is
yes.
not is more of a taste feeling. Like it
Okay.
feels like when I drink Basha, I will say like I feel like I'm in my power. And when you're standing in your power, you have peace. Right? It's like
Yeah.
that unmovable, unshakable feeling. That's what I get from Basha.
Uh, I love that. I love that. Basha, I definitely can say that. Basha's really caramelly to me, which is along the lines of chocolate. So when these notes we're talking about is just how our mind perceives the flavors in a black cup of coffee. And so, yeah, it's really, I think the toffee definitely is a good note that I definitely can relate to. And then I also, so, I'm thinking about, okay, stay with me because it's gonna sound bad, but it's actually good. Fig Newtons.
I love a fig Newton. There's nothing bad about that.
Oh, good. Me too. Okay. Me too. Okay. There is there's a kind that I get now. I can't remember the name of it. It comes in like a red package, but it comes with two and oh, hello. It comes with two in the pack. And anyway, they have this raspberry flavor and it's so good. I just love a good fig bar. And so I also get kind of a figgy raspberry taste from Basha too. So it's so interesting. We were talking a little bit about that, about notes and how notes can differ depending on your diet, where you're from, what you've been exposed to, then even the names of things. Like when we went to, I think my husband said the first time he went to Ethiopia, they kept talking about this thing called Hopi. And he got to try Hopi, and when he opened it, on the inside, he was just like, "What is this?" And then he tried it, and it was passion fruit. And so of course it tastes totally different from the passion fruit that we have here in America, the little bananas they have. And so I think it's definitely different that way. And then also there is a thought, there is a line of thought and a line of belief that with some of the crops they use banana leaves for shade for for the coffee, especially like some of the higher elevation. They use banana leaves, artificial banana leaves. And so there's that, and then there's also some other crops maybe growing near the coffee trees. And so sometimes you might, the like I said, the line of thought is that you might taste like if there's a pineapple growing, in the same soil, that it may bring a note of pineapple, into the coffee. But it could, or it couldn't, like it's definitely worth more research. I mean, most people are like, no, no, that's not true. But we don't have to be so, it doesn't have to be so black and white. So, yeah, Basha, and then sorry, back to Basha Besties. So Basha Besties it was coined by Sydney Barnes, one of our amazing baristas, and my roaster apprentice, the second woman roaster in Memphis, Tennessee. And so she started because Adam would talk about Basha all the time. And then I was like, Sana talks about Basha all the time too. And so she just one day was just like, okay, Basha bestie to Adam. And I was like, wait a minute, is that a thing? Because I think it just became a thing. And so anyway, it's basically those who stand Basha.
Yeah.
Anything that Basha produces, you you stand. So we're really hoping to get some of his new harvest, his new crop in. Um, it's gonna be, but it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good.
Yeah, I mean, the Basha Besties, I feel like it's a Basha Bestie link up, Basha Bestie tasting of the new Basha that will be
Oh my
incoming.
God. Yeah. And the video
Yes.
that you made. I'm
We'll have
excited for that release as
Oh
well.
yes. we'll have to host a Basha tasting and introduce more
Absolutely.
people to the powers of Basha. And after hearing about kind of like the origin story or one of the origin myths about the coffee tree, it really, seriously, Basha is blessed and it is Basha himself. But then also because I too believe in like the energy and intention you put into creating something. But I love what you said about how we taste coffee because I also feel like sometimes people can feel like, am I not tasting it right? Am I doing it wrong? And I think we have a lot of those feelings about things that we do, like there's a right or wrong way to do it. Because
Mhm.
even when I was in the shop the other day and was tasting, what was the new coffee? I bought a bag
Yeah,
of it.
yeah. These presses.
No,
Yeah. Oh,
not
you
the
bought that?
yayo. No, what I bought, the
No.
other bag, the Ubuntu.
Oh, Ubuntu, the
Ubuntu.
new Rwandan
The
Ubuntu.
Rwandan. Yes. And I said, as soon as
Yeah.
you started pouring it, I was like, it smells like soy or like miso,
Oh,
something.
yes. Oh, that was just, yeah, I forget that. Yes, I do remember that. I do remember that.
Yeah. And so
I
where it's like you wouldn't think that those, aromas would be coming from coffee, but thinking
Yeah,
about like maybe my own taste buds or heritage and how I'm interpreting, right? Interpreting
sure.
the flavors or what
It is.
language I have for it.
It directly points to that. So I know even today we got the new Burundi. I do think it has a full body mouthfeel. So you definitely need to come try it. Today I was smelling the green before I roasted it, and I smelled pickles. Um, KD, who was one of our former baristas, he was up here getting coffee and he smelled McDonald's fries, which is wild to me. But our brain makes synapses, like it makes these connections to understand things, and so we can only understand mostly we've experienced and made synapses for as we're building those new, we're building new synapses and saying, oh wait, but maybe it's not hot pickle, maybe it's magnolia. I don't know. Maybe it smells like that. I don't know. But like I think it makes sense scientifically and it makes sense experientially. Like, of course, your mind is going to experience what it has experienced. But I think the beauty in coffee and what it can teach is that though you have experienced what you've experienced and it does impact like what you see and perceive and taste in the now, there's always space to learn more and perceive more and expand, what you do understand in the moment. There's always space to expand that, always room for growth, always room, so I think something that coffee uniquely brings as a beverage. I mean, of course, there's wine and all these craft beers and things like that, but I do think coffee uniquely. But then that's also with me. I'm sure there's some spaces in beer that I dislike the hops and the IPA. I'll pass on all of that. But there's always space. From what I've seen in coffee, it's like your experience is here, but what you can learn is the height of a skyscraper. There's so much, the opportunities of learning more, of expanding, they're just endless.
I love that. That is so true. And that opportunity to learn more is something that you all have given to us and are sharing with us that we get to experience through
Yeah.
Coffee Black. And so for everyone who is listening, I mean, what a wonderful opportunity. Even in this conversation, probably you have learned and expanded your coffee knowledge so much. I mean, I know I definitely have, and then taking that knowledge again from out of just the brain but also into the experiential knowledge. This is a long nerdy way of me saying get you a cup of Coffee Black Black because it has to be experienced taste
Has to.
wise and not just in
Yes.
in the thinking. And so
Yeah.
Renata, thank you so much for being here with us today and giving us the opportunity to expand our own knowledge on so many different levels.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was fun. I always love talking to you anyway. So this is easy. This is light work.
Yes, yes. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. You could tell I was nerding out a little bit, and I love coffee. We are here on Let's Grab Coffee. It's not just a name, it really is a lifestyle. And so I'm so glad that we have Coffee Black and the Anti Gentrification Coffee Club located here in Memphis, Tennessee. And of course, wherever you are listening, wherever in the world, you could still experience Coffee Black as well. Definitely check them out. Cxffeeblack.com, Cxffeeblack for all of your coffee news. I have to say a big thank you to Renata Henderson, co-founder of Coffee Black, for being here with us this morning. I can't wait to be back here with you again next week. And of course, if like me, you're already ready to re-listen to this conversation, make sure that you're subscribed to Let's Grab Coffee wherever you stream podcasts and also on YouTube.